Welcome back. We are going to continue studying the central nervous system. So we looked at some of the basics of the structural components of the brain. Now we're going to move into the different components. So we're going to start with what's called the hindbrain and the midbrain. This cartoon is kind of showing the evolution of the human brain. So we start with what is called the reptilian brain, and that is the brainstem. That's what we're going to be looking at here. And then we evolved in small mammals a limbic system, and then eventually the neocortex, which is going to make up the cerebrum. So as the brain evolved, we just kept adding layers to it. So we still have the reptilian brain. We still have the brainstem, the very autonomic part of our brain, and then we've just layered on different components as evolution has occurred. So we're going to start here. We're going to start with our brainstem. So here you can see the components. We've got the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain. Okay, those are the components of the brainstem. The diencephalon is actually part of the forebrain, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. So it's very similar in structure to the spinal cord because it basically is connected to the spinal cord. It's right here. But you're going to have more embedded nuclei. Remember that nuclei are collections of cell bodies within the central nervous system. And then your next thought should be, if there's cell bodies there, there are synapses there. That's why these nuclei exist. The brainstem controls autonomic behaviors. It's essentially what is keeping you alive. It keeps you breathing. It keeps your heart beating properly. It maintains blood pressure. All of those different components. It's got a lot of fiber tracts running through it that are coming up from the spinal cord or down from the cerebrum, traveling within the central nervous system. 10 of your 12 cranial nerves are all going to be directly originating off of brainstem structures. So we're going to start at the caudal end, and we're going to do the medulla oblongata. So here is your spinal cord, and then there's your foramen magnum right there. Okay, so here's the bone. And this first component of the brainstem is called the medulla oblongata. So we are going to be sort of anatomically in the fourth ventricle. So we're going to see a wall of the fourth ventricle here made up by the medulla oblongata. So that fourth ventricle is right here. Okay, so this wall right here is partially made up by the medulla oblongata. You have a choroid plexus in there to filter. So this is where we're going to have all of our autonomic reflexes. So things like a cardiovascular center. This is very important in maintaining blood pressure. A vasomotor center that's going to deal with your blood vessel dilation and constriction. Depending on what's going on with your blood pressure, we need to adjust the rate and force of your heart. All of that comes from the medulla oblongata. Your respiratory centers are here. There are multiple ones, but one of them are here. This is where you generate a normal rhythm of breathing. You've got centers, your vomiting center, things that cause you to hiccup, your swallowing reflex, coughing, sneezing. All of these things lie in the medulla oblongata. Injury here is often fatal because you can't beat your heart, you can't breathe, nothing in terms of homeostasis, all of these reflexes that are supposed to keep you stable, they can be damaged if there's damage to the medulla oblongata. Going rostral from there, we've got the pons. Okay, so this was the medulla oblongata here. Now we are in the pons. There you can see it on the brain. This should look most similar to the models that you're looking at in lab. So here again, we're still sort of working in this fourth ventricle area. So right there, okay. Kind of looks like the letter or the number 4 when you're looking at it from this direction. The pons is basically kind of like a relay center. So you're going to have connections between the higher brain centers and the spinal cord. And particularly important is going to be fibers running from the motor cortex to the cerebellum, which is this structure right here. Okay, so that's going to be really important there. One of the major things that happens in the Pontine Center is that you have a respiratory center that helps out the one that's in the medulla oblongata. So injury to the pons can make it difficult to adjust any sort of respiratory rate. It can make it very hard to adapt to different environments with your breathing rate, and so your breathing just stays very stable. So again, pretty significant major issues if there's injuries there. The midbrain, so now again, we're just continuing our movement in the rostral direction. So here's that. You can see it here on a sagittal model. Here we're talking about the area between the diencephalon, this area here, and the pons. It's where the cerebral aqueduct runs in terms of the ventricular system. Big thing going on here is your visual and auditory reflexes. So if you've ever seen somebody, open up the eye of somebody and shine a light in it to see if the pupil contracts, that reflex center lies in the midbrain. If you've seen somebody go up to somebody who might be, checking consciousness level, and they make a very loud noise next to their ear, like they clap their hands or something like that, and the person responds and turns their head toward the sound, that means the auditory reflex is intact. If they don't, it means there's an issue. So that's a way of telling where an injury is to look with what deficit are we looking at. Brainstem injuries tend to be very, very serious because of the significant autonomic homeostatic controls that lie within the brainstem. When you get into the cerebrum, you can get injuries that are also very, very serious, but they tend to be more in terms of personality almost issues, where somebody may have an injury and they lose, the ability to express themselves properly, or it could be a motor issue where they're, not able to move a part of their body, but it's not fatal like a brainstem injury, because the brainstem is not controlling whether or not you can write your name with a pencil. The brainstem is controlling whether or not your heart is beating. So in terms of kind of what goes on in different parts of the central nervous system, there are certainly different areas that tend to be more serious than the others. Here you can see all the embedded nuclei. Okay, so this is the medulla oblongata, and then you move into the pons, and then eventually into the midbrain. Those of you going on into neuroanatomy, you will be learning every one of these nuclei, what's going on in them. You'll be able to actually identify them. So that's definitely something that's coming for you guys that are going to do neuro. The reticular formation is a kind of network of neurons. It's not in one particular place. It's got your eyes involved, your ears involved. You've got tracts coming through the brainstem here, in and out of the spinal cord, and then running all up through the cerebrum as well. So this is a complex network as opposed to one particular structure. There's a few different things going on here. This is what keeps you awake. Okay, so there's kind of this like reflexive, constant sending of signals into the cerebrum that is keeping your brain awake. You have to inhibit this center to actually sleep. Your concept of habituation, or your ability to kind of ignore constant stimuli, is going to utilize this. We've got some muscle action that utilizes the reticular formation. That is part of your cardiovascular center because of the medulla oblongata. Your sense of pain is somewhat modulated. A lot of different areas of your brain are involved in pain, but the reticular formation is also involved in how you experience pain, how you feel the pain. So this is one of a couple different formations that we have that are really sort of spread out through the entire central nervous system as opposed to being one, anatomically delineated structure. Now, the cerebellum is pretty big. It's about 10%. It sits dorsal to the pons and the medulla. We used to really just focus in on the fact that the cerebellum deals with sort of patterning out your skeletal muscle contraction and smoothing out the individual contractions into something that sort of works together in a really nice way. However, the more we study it, we're also seeing that it is an evaluation center. So we evaluate sensory information, language, emotional stimuli are all going to at least involve the cerebellum in some way. So the more we study the cerebellum, the more we're able to learn that there's more going on there than simply the role in muscle contraction. So we've got two hemispheres of the cerebellum. They're connected by a structure called the vermis, and each hemisphere has 3 lobes. You've got what are called folia, which are the folds that are basically in the transverse plane. Okay. The interior has what's called the arbor vitae. It looks like a little tree. Arbor means tree. And it's where the white matter is. So right away you can think, okay, this is going to be myelinated axons. That's where the axons are in the cerebellum. And then it's going to be connected to the brainstem via what are called the cerebellar peduncles. So you've got a superior, middle, and inferior that are going to make those connections. All right, so here we can see this is the arbor vitae. So the white matter is going to be deep, with the gray matter being superficial here. So there's the pons, there's the medulla, there's your midbrain. Okay, here's a really nice view of the fourth ventricle and the cerebral aqueduct. This is what it looks like if you're looking posteriorly. And then here we are on the actual brain.